History books have kept a monumental secret from us all. The story of our world is not one of isolated cultures, but of ancient whispers passed between continents long before famous explorers ever set sail. By the end of this journey, you will see the entire timeline of human civilization in a completely new light. We will uncover how a humble root vegetable crossed an ocean it should not have, and why ancient chicken bones are causing such an uproar among archaeologists. These are not mere coincidences, but clues to a forgotten age of global connection. What does our past look like when we dare to question what we have been taught? That single obsidian blade, lying far from the volcanic mountains where it was born, speaks a silent language of ancient journeys. It tells us that the human drive to explore and to trade is as old as humanity itself. Our ancestors were never truly isolated. They were connected by a web of pathways, forged by curiosity and the need for resources. Vast oceans and towering mountain ranges were not the impenetrable walls we might imagine. They were challenges to be met with incredible ingenuity. People moved, and as they moved, they carried with them not just physical goods, but knowledge, stories, and technologies. Archaeologist James Adavasio's work reveals how the very nature of nomadic life meant that ideas could travel as steadily as the seasons changed. This process was often a slow diffusion, a gradual spread of a tool or a tradition from one community to the next over generations. But sometimes change seemed to arrive with startling speed. How is it possible that a specific method for crafting a stone tool appears in two distant parts of the world at nearly the same time? Is it simply a case of parallel invention, of two different minds solving a problem in the same way? Or is it a whisper of a connection, a thread in that vast prehistoric web? These questions form the essential foundation. Before we can understand the grand exchanges of later eras, we must first recognize the deep, ancient currents of movement that made them possible. That same human ingenuity for crossing land bridges could also conquer the sea, as a simple root vegetable proves. The sweet potato carries a genetic story that upends our entire understanding of ancient travel. Its wild ancestors are found only in South America, yet archaeological evidence places it in Polynesia by roughly the year 1000. This is centuries before any European explorer is recorded reaching the Pacific Islands. The question is undeniable: how did it get there? The most straightforward answer is also the most astonishing. Someone made the journey. Botanical genetics offer a crucial clue. Researchers have analyzed the DNA of modern sweet potatoes from across the Pacific and compared them to wild varieties in the Americas. The genetic links are clear, pointing to a single, initial introduction from South America into the heart of Polynesia. This was not a slow, step-by-step transfer. It was a long-distance leap, but the evidence does not stop with science. Listen to the names given to this plant. In parts of Polynesia, it was called kumara. In the Quechua language of the Andes, a similar word was used, kumar. This linguistic echo across 10,000 miles of open ocean is difficult to dismiss as mere chance. It suggests that the name traveled with the tuber carried by people who shared words along with their harvest. So how did this happen? One theory points to the powerful currents of the Pacific. Could a fishing boat from South America have been caught in a storm, swept westward for months until it finally made landfall on a Polynesian shore? The survivors, with their precious cargo of food, would have been welcomed, their strange new vegetable adopted into the local diet. This scenario of accidental drift is possible, and oceanographic studies show that currents could indeed facilitate such a desperate voyage. but another, more daring idea exists. What if the journey was intentional? The Polynesians were the greatest navigators of the ancient world. They used the stars, the waves, and the flight patterns of birds to explore the vast Pacific. Is it so hard to believe they might have ventured east, pushing beyond their known horizons until they encountered a new continent? They could have returned with a remarkable new food source, a crop that would go on to sustain entire civilizations. This humble plant forces us to confront a world that was far more connected than we ever knew. If a sweet potato could cross the greatest ocean on Earth, what else was moving between worlds long before the history books say it was possible? But a root vegetable is one thing. The journey of a living animal is another entirely. On the coast of Chile, archaeologists made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the historical community. They unearthed chicken bones. This seems mundane until you understand the context. These were not European chickens brought by Spanish colonists. Radiocarbon dating placed these remains from sometime between 1300 and 1420, long before Columbus sailed. And the genetic story was even more revealing. The DNA of these ancient chickens did not match breeds from Europe. It was a nearly identical match to chicken varieties found in Polynesia. Here was a domesticated animal, a creature that could not have floated across an ocean on a raft, that had somehow crossed the Pacific centuries before history said it could. Establishing this timeline was the crucial first step, and it relied on the precise science of radiocarbon dating. This method measures the slow decay of a radioactive form of carbon in organic material like bone. By calculating how much of this carbon has decayed, scientists can estimate the age of a sample with remarkable accuracy. The dates for these Chilean chicken bones were clear and consistently pre-Columbian. This finding, however, was met with intense debate. Skeptics questioned whether the samples could have been contaminated or if the dating was somehow flawed. Yet repeated testing has only strengthened the original claim, forcing a reluctant academic world to confront a profound possibility. The presence of these birds speaks to more than just a food source. In both Polynesian and South American cultures, chickens held a significance that went beyond the dinner plate. They often played roles in ceremonial practices and were symbols of status. The transfer of such an animal was likely a meaningful exchange, not a simple accident. It hints at a sharing of cultural ideas, a moment of contact where people exchanged not just goods, but a part of their way of life. Could Polynesian sailors have possibly made such a journey? Their maritime technology was nothing short of revolutionary. They built massive double-hulled voyaging canoes, capable of carrying dozens of people, plants, and animals for months at sea. These were not simple rafts, but sophisticated vessels with woven sails designed for deep ocean travel. Their navigation system was a masterpiece of empirical science. They read the subtle patterns of ocean swells, the specific paths of migratory birds, and the positions of stars we cannot even see from northern latitudes. This was not just sailing, it was wayfinding, a holistic art of perceiving the ocean itself. Modern experimental archaeology has proven this was possible. Crews using traditional Polynesian navigation methods and replica vessels have successfully sailed from Polynesia to South America and back again, demonstrating that these voyages were not just theoretical, but achievable with the technology of the time. A sweet potato traveling west, a chicken traveling east. These are not isolated curiosities. They form a pattern, a two-way street of exchange across the world's largest ocean. This evidence of animal domestication crossing vast waters forces a fundamental reconsideration. It suggests that ancient civilizations were not isolated islands of humanity, waiting to be discovered. They were active participants in a wider world, capable of deliberate, long-distance exploration that forever changed the biological and cultural landscape of our planet. If people and their animals were moving between these worlds, what other ideas, technologies, or even illnesses might have traveled with them? A stunned silence fell in that German laboratory, a quiet broken only by the hum of machines and the weight of an impossible result. Chemical analysis of Egyptian mummies, individuals who had lived and died millennia before Columbus, revealed traces of nicotine and cocaine. These were substances whose only known sources at the time of the discovery were plants native to the Americas, a world supposedly separated from ancient Egypt by an entire ocean. This was not a single questionable finding. Multiple mummies from different time periods and locations in Egypt tested positive for these compounds, creating a puzzle that cut to the very heart of historical isolation. The methodology behind this discovery was meticulous. Researchers used gas chromatography and mass spectrometry, techniques that can identify the unique chemical fingerprints of specific molecules with extreme precision. This was not guesswork, it was a scientific detection of substances that should not have been there. The immediate and most obvious question was one of contamination. Could handling the mummies in modern times or the environments where they were stored have introduced these compounds? This was the primary counter-argument from skeptics, and a serious one. Yet, the researchers argued that the compounds were found deep within the mummified tissue, and even within the hair shafts, which are less susceptible to external contamination than the outer wrappings. The debate that followed was, and remains, vigorous. It pits a straightforward, if revolutionary, interpretation against a more complex biological possibility. What if there were old-world plants, now extinct or simply not yet rediscovered by modern botany, that also produced nicotine or cocaine? This is a compelling alternative. The natural world is vast, and our knowledge of ancient flora is incomplete. It is entirely possible that a plant native to Africa or Asia, one that has since vanished, could have been the true source. This mystery deepens when we look beyond the chemistry labs and into the art of ancient Egypt itself. Some researchers point to specific artistic representations, carvings and paintings that they interpret as depictions of New World plants, like the tobacco plant or the water lily-like form of the coca plant. These interpretations are, of course, highly subjective. What one scholar sees as a tobacco leaf, another might identify as a stylized version of a known Egyptian plant. The artistic evidence is tantalizing but far from conclusive. So where does this leave us? With a profound and unresolved question. The mummies present us with a direct physical anomaly. If the explanation is not a lost old world plant, then the implications are staggering. It suggests that trade networks, or at the very least sporadic contact, spanned the Atlantic Ocean in the deep past. It forces us to consider a world where ancient mariners, perhaps from Africa or even the Mediterranean, possessed the knowledge and the courage to navigate currents that would later carry European ships to the Americas. This is not just about the transfer of a recreational substance. It is about the flow of ideas, of technologies, of entire worldviews. The presence of these molecules, if authentic, is a whisper of connections that have been lost to time, hinting at an ancient globalism we are only just beginning to perceive. The mystery of the mummies deepens when we look at a much older world, one of bronze and amber and vast forgotten sea routes. While we grapple with transoceanic possibilities, a different kind of evidence is emerging from the very cradle of civilization itself. A theory is gaining ground that suggests a global network was already in operation during the Bronze Age, a system of exchange connecting societies from the British Isles to the Yellow River. This was not the world of later empires, but a patchwork of kingdoms and city-states engaged in a commerce so sophisticated it hints at a kind of proto-globalization. The sheer scale of it forces us to reconsider what ancient people were capable of achieving. How could cultures separated by thousands of miles develop such strikingly similar technologies at nearly the same time? The answer may lie not in isolated genius but in shared knowledge. Consider the art of bronze making. The alloy itself, a mix of copper and tin, was a revolutionary advancement. But the specific methods for casting it, the intricate formulas for achieving the right strength and luster, appear with remarkable consistency across Eurasia. From the workshops of ancient Britain to the forges of China, artisans were employing techniques that were just a little too similar to be purely coincidental. This points to a slow but steady diffusion of technological secrets passed along trade routes over generations. The objects themselves began to travel incredible distances. A piece of jewelry carved from Baltic amber, a substance formed in the ancient forests of northern Europe, could find its final resting place in an Egyptian pharaoh's tomb. Meanwhile, in the great cities of the Indus Valley, archaeologists have uncovered seals and beads that originated in distant Mesopotamia. These were not just random trinkets. They were valuable commodities carried overland and by sea, linking the fortunes of kings and merchants across continents. The most telling clues often come from the seafloor, where shipwrecks from this era act as frozen moments in time. One such wreck, discovered off the coast of Turkey, held a cargo that was a catalogue of the ancient world. It contained raw materials like copper and tin ingots, finished goods from Cyprus, pottery from Canaan, and even personal items from the sailors themselves. This single vessel was a microcosm of a vast trade network, carrying not just one type of good, but a whole economic system across the Mediterranean. Perhaps the most compelling evidence for this early integration is something we rarely think about: standardization. In an age without international treaties, how did a merchant from the Indus Valley conduct business with a partner in Mesopotamia? They used a system of standardized weights. Remarkably, units of measure known as the shekel and the mina appear in both civilizations with an almost identical weight. This was not a formal agreement, but an organic development born of necessity. For trade to flow smoothly over such vast distances, there had to be a common language of value, a mutual trust embedded in the very scales they used. This emerging picture is one of a world already deeply intertwined. These civilizations were not isolated cradles of innovation, growing independently. They were nodes in a vast, pulsating network, exchanging metals, ideas, luxury goods, and even units of measurement. This Bronze Age world was far more cosmopolitan, far more connected than our history books have led us to believe. And if such a network existed then, what does that say about the potential for even earlier, more daring connections across the great oceans that divided the continents? Standing before one of the colossal stone heads of the Olmec civilization in Mexico, you are met with a face that feels strangely familiar. The broad nose, the full lips, the distinct facial features are powerfully rendered in the volcanic rock. For decades, this striking resemblance has fueled one of history's most debated ideas: the possibility of ancient contact between West Africa and the Americas long before the age of European exploration. This is not merely about artistic style, proponents argue, but a convergence of evidence that points to a profound connection. They point to linguistic echoes, where certain words in the Olmec vocabulary bear a surprising similarity to terms in Mandingo languages. For instance, the Olmec word for a ceremonial leader sounds close to a Mandingo word for a person of authority. While mainstream linguists often dismiss these as chance resemblances, the pattern invites deeper consideration. The biological evidence is even more tangible. The bottle gourd, a plant native to Africa, appears in the Americas at a remarkably early date. How did it cross the Atlantic? Meanwhile, genetic studies suggest that maize, a crop born in the New World, may have found its way to the coasts of Africa well before documented European contact. These plants could not have floated across an ocean on their own. They needed human carriers. This botanical data forces a simple but radical question: who were the carriers? The historical record offers a compelling candidate. In the year 1324, the 10th Mansa, or emperor of the Mali Empire, a ruler named Abubakari II, reportedly abdicated his throne. His reason, according to Arab historians of the era, was to personally lead a massive fleet of ships into the Atlantic Ocean. He invested immense resources into this venture, building hundreds of vessels and stocking them with supplies for a 2-year journey. The historical accounts state that he set sail and never returned. Where did that fleet go? Could the currents have carried them to the shores of the Gulf of Mexico, where the Olmec civilization was flourishing? The maritime technology of the West African kingdoms was certainly capable of such a voyage. They were experienced sailors, familiar with navigating the complex currents of the Atlantic, and their ships were large enough to undertake a long-distance expedition. Of course, the academic world remains deeply divided on this hypothesis. Skeptics rightly demand more than similarities and a single historical account. They call for definitive archaeological proof, like a West African artifact conclusively dated and found in an undisturbed Olmec layer. They argue that the colossal heads are perfect representations of the local indigenous population, and that the linguistic parallels are coincidental. This skepticism is a vital part of the scientific process, ensuring that extraordinary claims are met with rigorous scrutiny. Yet, even without a smoking gun, the collective weight of the artistic, linguistic, botanical, and historical evidence presents a powerful mystery. It challenges the traditional narrative of a world where the Atlantic was an insurmountable barrier. What if it was not a barrier but a highway traversed by courageous explorers whose stories were lost to time? The Olmec heads do not speak, but their silent, stony gaze continues to ask a question that echoes across the centuries, a question about our shared human past and the forgotten journeys that may have woven it together. Legends speak of a sunken continent slumbering beneath the vast Pacific, a place called Mu. In the late 19th century, a curious idea captured the public imagination, proposing that this lost land was the original mother culture for civilizations across the Pacific Rim. Augustus Le Plongeon, an amateur archaeologist, first wove this tale after studying Mayan ruins, claiming he had translated ancient texts that spoke of a lost continent called Mu. His theories were later expanded by a writer named James Churchward, who claimed to have learned of Mu from sacred tablets shown to him in India. These men envisioned Mu as a Pacific counterpart to Atlantis, a sophisticated civilization that had vanished beneath the waves in a cataclysm, its survivors scattering their knowledge across the world. The core of their argument rested on a series of cultural similarities they observed across immense distances. They pointed to the prevalence of pyramid structures, from the step temples of Mesoamerica to the earthwork platforms of ancient Southeast Asia. They noted the recurring theme of serpent worship, a powerful symbol found in Aboriginal Australian Dreamtime stories, in the feathered serpents of Central America, and in the dragon lore of East Asia. Most compelling of all were the flood myths, stories of a great deluge that appear in the oral traditions of nearly every culture surrounding the Pacific. Could these shared threads be echoes of a common origin, a single-source civilization that once existed on a now-vanished continent? geologists offer a more grounded, yet still fascinating perspective. While there is no evidence for a single continent-sized landmass like Mu, the Pacific Basin was indeed a very different place during the last ice age. Vast amounts of water were locked in glaciers, causing sea levels to be hundreds of feet lower than they are today. This exposed enormous stretches of continental shelf, creating land bridges and archipelagos that are now completely submerged. These sunken landscapes, like the Sunda Shelf connecting Southeast Asia or the vast Sahel continent linking Australia and New Guinea, were not myths. They were real, habitable land that served as stepping stones for ancient human migration. The journey from Asia into the Pacific Islands was not a single, impossible leap across open ocean, but a gradual, generation-by-generation expansion across a visible and connected world. The scientific evidence extends from the land to the people themselves. Linguists have traced the distribution of the Austronesian language family, a vast group of related tongues spoken from Madagascar to Easter Island. The patterns of this linguistic spread map almost perfectly onto the proposed migration routes out of Southeast Asia and across the Pacific. Even more telling are genetic markers. Studies of mitochondrial DNA passed from mother to child reveal distinct lineages that can be traced back through time, showing clear connections between populations in Taiwan, the Philippines, and distant Polynesia. This genetic trail is a slow, steady clock, ticking in time with the archaeological evidence of their movement. So where does this leave the legend of Mu? The grand, unified civilization described by Le Plongeon and Churchward remains in the realm of speculation, a romantic idea unsupported by hard evidence. But the enduring appeal of the story reveals a profound truth. It highlights our deep fascination with lost connections and the haunting possibility of entire worlds that have vanished beneath the waves. The real story is not of a single sunken continent, but of a dynamic, ever-changing planet whose shifting seas both revealed and then erased the pathways of our ancestors. These submerged landscapes were the true bridges, and their disappearance created the very isolation that makes these ancient cultural similarities so mysterious to us today. A map drawn in 1513 seems to defy the very timeline of exploration. It is the work of an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis, who compiled it from numerous source charts, some reportedly dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. The map fragment that survives is stunning not for what it shows of the known world, but for what it reveals of the unknown. It depicts the eastern coast of South America with an accuracy that seems improbable for the era. But the greater mystery lies farther south. The map appears to show a landmass connected to that continent, a landmass whose features bear a startling resemblance to the coastline of Antarctica, a continent that would not be officially discovered for another 300 years. This is not a simple case of a lucky guess. The map shows topographic details like mountain ranges that we now know lie buried beneath miles of Antarctic ice. How could a 16th century cartographer have charted a land that was, according to conventional history, utterly invisible to his world? The explanation offered by Piri Reis himself is that he was working from much older source maps, charts that recorded the geographical knowledge of ancient seafarers. This suggests that the world had been mapped long before the age of European exploration, and that this knowledge was preserved in scattered libraries and then lost, surviving only in these enigmatic copies. This idea of lost knowledge finds a parallel in the epic voyages of the Chinese admiral Zheng He. In the early 15th century, decades before Columbus, Zheng He commanded a treasure fleet of hundreds of ships, some of them over 400 feet long, dwarfing any European vessel of the time. His missions took him across the Indian Ocean to the coast of Africa and potentially much, much farther. A copy of a map, allegedly based on Zheng He's own charts, shows a world that seems to include not just Africa, but the Americas and even the outlines of Antarctica. While the authenticity of this specific map is debated, it aligns with the staggering scale of his documented voyages. The technological capability was certainly there. How did these ancient mariners achieve such feats of cartography? They used a suite of sophisticated, if primitive, tools. The astrolabe allowed them to determine their latitude by measuring the angle of the sun or stars above the horizon. The camel, a simple rectangular card on a knotted string, served a similar purpose for Arab navigators. They read the ocean itself, observing the patterns of swells, the color of the water, and the flight paths of seabirds to infer the direction of unseen land. Mapping a coastline was a monumental task of triangulation and dead reckoning, built up over countless voyages and passed down through generations of sailors. The true weight of this mystery lies in the possibility of catastrophic loss. Civilizations rise and fall, and with their collapse, vast repositories of knowledge can vanish in a single generation. The Great Library of Alexandria is the most famous example, but it is merely one of many. What if the maps of Zhenghi's fleet were deliberately destroyed by a court faction that saw foreign exploration as a costly distraction? What if the source charts used by Piri Reis were the last surviving copies from an Alexandrian archive, their origins forever obscured by time? These maps stand as silent, haunting witnesses to a forgotten chapter in human history. They challenge the linear narrative of discovery we so often take for granted. They suggest that the world's coastlines were charted, its oceans crossed, and its continents known to a select few, long before our history books say it was possible. The knowledge was simply lost, waiting to be rediscovered in the faded ink of an ancient parchment. The stars were humanity's first shared language, a silent conversation unfolding above every continent. Long before satellites or the internet, ancient astronomers from the deserts of Mesopotamia to the highlands of Peru were looking at the same celestial patterns, recording the same movements, and arriving at strikingly similar conclusions. This was not mere coincidence. It suggests a potential intellectual network, a diffusion of ideas as real as the trade in spices or silk. Consider the slow, majestic wobble of Earth's axis, known as the precession of the equinoxes. This 26,000-year cycle is so gradual that its effects are barely noticeable over a single human lifetime. Yet, the ancient Greeks documented it, the Maya encoded it into their long count calendar, and Hindu texts describe it with remarkable accuracy. How could cultures separated by oceans and millennia have independently detected this subtle drift of the stars? Some researchers argue it is a testament to incredible, patient observation over centuries. Others hear in this shared knowledge a whisper of exchanged information, a thread of astronomical insight passed along forgotten routes. The evidence is not just written on scrolls but carved in stone. Around the world, ancient architects oriented their most sacred structures to the heavens. The Great Pyramid at Giza is precisely aligned to the cardinal directions. On the spring equinox, the serpent of light slithers down the steps of the pyramid at Chichen Itza. At Stonehenge, the rising sun on the summer solstice pierces the heart of the monument. These are not random orientations. They are deliberate, complex acts of engineering that required a deep understanding of the solar and lunar cycles. Such consistent architectural purpose, from the British Isles to the Yucatan Peninsula, points to a sophisticated and perhaps globally connected understanding of celestial mechanics. This connection extended to the very numbers they used to measure the sky. Our modern system of dividing a circle into 360 degrees and an hour into 60 minutes comes directly from ancient Mesopotamia. The base 60 system was brilliant for astronomers because the number 60 is divisible by so many smaller numbers. making complex calculations of celestial movements far simpler. This mathematical concept appears to have traveled, influencing Greek astronomy and later Indian and Islamic science before reaching Europe. The movement of a number, a tool for understanding the cosmos, is a powerful form of intellectual exchange. It is more than just a practical tool, it is a shared framework for perceiving the universe itself. When we piece together the precession cycles, the aligned monuments, and the traveling mathematics, a profound picture emerges. It reveals a world where knowledge flowed as freely as any trade good, connecting the great minds of antiquity in a silent, global dialogue. What were they trying to tell us, and what other profound understandings have been lost in the silent spaces between the stars? A layer of earth in India, dated centuries before Columbus, holds a microscopic clue that should not exist. It is the pollen of maize, a plant whose story was supposed to begin and end in the Americas until European ships carried it worldwide. This single, fragile grain challenges the very timeline of our global pantry. How could a staple of the New World find its way into the soil of the Old, long before the history books say it was possible? This is not an isolated anomaly. In ancient Mediterranean sites, archaeologists have uncovered what appear to be the preserved seeds of sunflowers, another crop whose wild origins are firmly rooted in the Americas. Far to the east, in the soil of China, there are claims of peanut remains from a time before any documented transoceanic trade. Each of these findings is a small, quiet bomb going off in the world of archaeology, forcing a difficult question. Were our maps of the ancient world missing a few crucial routes? The immediate scientific response to such claims is one of healthy skepticism. Could the maize pollen have been blown by the wind from a modern field, settling into an older layer of earth and confusing the dating process? Might those Mediterranean sunflower seeds be from a similar but local plant that has since gone extinct? This process of questioning is essential, a rigorous effort to rule out every other possibility before accepting a revolutionary idea. Researchers must consider misidentification, contamination of the site, or the independent domestication of a similar species that simply no longer exists. Yet, when multiple findings from different parts of the world point in the same direction, the possibility of pre-Columbian transfer becomes harder to dismiss. If these plants did make the journey, how did they cross such vast expanses of water? The answer lies in the same maritime ingenuity we have seen before. A Polynesian voyaging canoe stocked with sweet potatoes and chickens could have also carried a few ears of maize back from a landing on the South American coast. This Pacific route seems increasingly plausible, but what about the Atlantic? Could a West African vessel, perhaps one from the fleet of Mansa Abubakari, have successfully crossed the ocean and returned, bringing with it new seeds? Or consider the powerful currents of the Atlantic Gyre, which could have swept a disabled ship from the coast of West Africa directly to the shores of Brazil. A surviving crew returning home on a subsequent voyage might have brought back a handful of strange, nourishing seeds as proof of their incredible journey. These botanical mysteries do not simply rewrite a date on a timeline. They unravel the neat and tidy story of the Columbian exchange, the idea that the biological unification of the world began abruptly in 1492. Instead, they paint a picture of a slower, more complex process, a series of sporadic transfers over centuries or even millennia. It suggests that the global network of life was not switched on in a single moment, but was instead a dimmer switch, slowly brightening through forgotten voyages and chance encounters. The food on our plates today may have a much deeper, more tangled, and far more mysterious history than we ever imagined. A Roman glass bowl rests in a Chinese tomb, its delicate form glowing under museum lights. Across the world, in the sands of Egypt, shreds of Chinese silk are found at a Red Sea port, both dating from a time before the Silk Road was a formalized network. These objects are not where they should be, and their presence whispers of sea lanes that history has largely forgotten. While the great overland routes get all the glory, a parallel story was unfolding on the water, a story of maritime connections that wove the Roman and Chinese worlds together indirectly, but no less significantly. The evidence is scattered across the coasts of the Indian Ocean. In southern Vietnam, hordes of Roman coins surface, far from any legion's march. These were not the lost change of a traveling merchant, but purposeful deposits, suggesting a thriving trade hub where Roman gold and silver were exchanged for the spices and aromatics of the East. At the same time, on the Egyptian coast of the Red Sea, archaeologists have uncovered Chinese pottery and bronzes at the port of Berenik. This was a key Roman terminal, a place where goods from the Indian Ocean were offloaded and began their journey north. The Chinese artifacts there did not arrive on Chinese ships, but they prove that goods and likely ideas were moving through a complex chain of hands across the sea. How were these voyages even possible? The technological capabilities of both empires were more than adequate for the challenge. Roman merchants used large, sturdy ships called corbiters, wide-bellied vessels with massive square sails that could carry hundreds of tons of cargo across the open ocean. They had mastered the monsoon winds, learning to ride these seasonal gales directly across the Indian Ocean instead of creeping cautiously along the coast. Recent studies of ancient shipwrecks reveal incredibly sophisticated woodworking, with hulls built using a shell-first technique that made them resilient and seaworthy for such long hauls. The Chinese, for their part, were developing advanced maritime technologies that would later culminate in the treasure ships of Admiral Zheng He. But even in this earlier era, their vessels were equipped with sternpost rudders and multiple masts, innovations that provided superior control and power on the open water. The real architects of this maritime web, however, were the cultures in between. The Kushan Empire, centered in what is now Afghanistan and Pakistan, acted as a crucial pivot point. They controlled territory that touched both the land-based Silk Road and the maritime routes of the Indian Ocean, allowing them to funnel goods and information between the two systems. Even more central were the Sogdians, a people from Central Asia who became the master traders of the ancient world. Their merchant colonies stretched from Samarkand to China, and their networks undoubtedly extended to the ports, acting as the connective tissue in a vast, unofficial global economy. They did not just move silk and glass, they moved languages, beliefs, and technologies operating in the spaces between empires. This emerging picture is one of stunning complexity. It was not a simple back and forth between Rome and China, but a pulsating, multi-layered network. Goods could travel by land to a Kushan port, be shipped across the Indian Ocean to Egypt, and then transported overland to the Mediterranean, all while official histories recorded only the grand gestures of emperors. This was ancient globalization in action, a web of connections operating through multiple channels, both land and sea, that predates and undermines our standard historical narratives. If such intricate systems were in place 2,000 years ago, how many other layers of connection have we yet to uncover from the silent depths of the sea and the shifting desert sands? The deck of a voyaging canoe is a classroom without walls, a place where the horizon is your only map and the ocean itself speaks a language of swells and stars. To stand there is to understand that the Pacific was not a barrier for the Polynesian people, but a pathway they mastered with an almost supernatural skill. Their method was not navigation in the sense we know it, but wayfinding, a holistic art of reading the environment. They did not just sail, they listened to the sea. At the heart of this system was the star compass, a mental map of the heavens where specific stars acted as fixed points on the horizon. They knew that as one star set, another would rise in a predictable location, creating a celestial highway across the night sky. But their knowledge went far beyond the stars. They became masters of wave piloting, feeling the subtle patterns of ocean swells reflected and refracted by distant islands. A seasoned wayfinder could sense a landmass over the horizon simply by the way the deep ocean rollers changed their rhythm, a skill as precise as any modern instrument. They watched the clouds, noting their color and formation, and followed the flight paths of specific seabirds known to fly out to sea to feed but return to land each evening. This was a science built on generations of empirical observation, a living database passed down through chants and oral histories. These genealogical chants were not mere stories, they were sacred repositories of knowledge. They recorded star paths, sailing directions, and the characteristics of islands, preserving this critical information across generations without a single written word. The sheer scope of their exploration is staggering. From a likely origin in Southeast Asia, they discovered and settled islands scattered across millions of square miles of open ocean, from Hawaii to New Zealand to remote Easter Island. Each new voyage was a leap of faith into the unknown, guided by this deep, accumulated wisdom. To prove this was possible, modern Hawaiian navigator Nainoa Thompson and the Polynesian Voyaging Society built a replica of a traditional double-hulled canoe named Hokulea. Using only these traditional wayfinding techniques with no modern instruments, Nainoa successfully navigated the Hokulea from Hawaii to Tahiti and back, a journey of over 5,000 miles. This voyage was more than an experiment, it was a cultural rebirth, demonstrating conclusively that the feats described in oral tradition were not myths but achievable realities. This maritime tradition fundamentally challenges the European narrative of discovery. When Captain James Cook arrived in the Pacific in the 18th century, he was astonished to find people already living on every habitable island. He had stumbled upon a world that had already been discovered, settled, and connected by a people whose navigational prowess surpassed that of any European sailor of the age. The Polynesian story redefines exploration itself. It reveals a maritime tradition so advanced it could intentionally connect the most remote landmasses on Earth, suggesting that the final chapters of humanity's great age of discovery were not written by Europeans in the Atlantic, but by Polynesians in the vast, star-lit Pacific. The crisp Arctic wind carries the sound of wooden hulls scraping against an unknown shore. 5 centuries before Columbus sailed, Viking longships landed on the coast of North America. This was not a legend, but a reality etched into the sagas of Iceland and now confirmed by the spade of the archaeologist. The Norse exploration of the North Atlantic was a monumental feat of seamanship, a stepping stone journey across a wild ocean. They first settled the remote shores of Greenland, establishing communities that would endure for generations. From there, the most daring among them pushed farther west into the fog-shrouded lands they called Vinland. The proof of their arrival lies at El Ants Ox Meadows in Newfoundland. This site, with its distinctive Norse-style foundations and artifacts like a bronze cloak pin and evidence of ironworking, is irrefutable. It was not a temporary camp but a small settlement, a base for further exploration and for repairing their ships. The sagas speak of encounters with the local peoples whom they called Skraelings. These were not simple meetings but complex interactions that wove a tapestry of conflict and curiosity. Archaeological finds hint at this nuanced relationship. While evidence of direct trade is sparse, the possibility of cultural exchange remains a tantalizing question. What knowledge might have been shared between these two worlds in those fleeting moments of contact? The Norse settlements in Greenland, however, ultimately faded away. The reasons for their abandonment offer profound lessons. A changing climate, the Little Ice Age, brought colder temperatures that shortened growing seasons and expanded sea ice, isolating the communities. Their reliance on a specific way of life, one heavily dependent on livestock and trade with Europe, made them vulnerable when that trade was disrupted. They faced growing competition for resources and perhaps conflict. These factors combined to make their continued existence unsustainable, a stark reminder that even the most resilient settlements are fragile in the face of environmental and social change. The Viking voyages stand as a powerful testament. They prove conclusively that transoceanic travel was achievable with medieval technology. Their longships, powered by sail and oar, were capable of crossing the treacherous North Atlantic. This raises a haunting historical question. If they could do it, why did this contact not spark a permanent reconnection of the continents? Why did the thread they established snap instead of strengthening into a lasting bond? The answer may lie in the very nature of their venture. It was an extension of their existing world, not a mission to forge a new one. The distance was vast, the settlements were small and ultimately unsustainable, and the connections to Europe were too tenuous to support a permanent bridge. The world was not yet ready for the global integration that would come later. The Vikings found a new world, but they could not yet build a new system to bind it to the old. A single massive stone, standing silent for millennia, seems to speak a language understood from the moors of Scotland to the highlands of Ethiopia. Scattered across the globe are the haunting remains of a megalithic culture, structures of colossal stone that echo one another with an uncanny resonance. The sprawling alignments of Karnak in France, with their thousands of upright stones arranged in eerie rows, find a distant relative in the menhir fields of India. The great dolmens of Korea, massive capstones balanced on uprights, are virtually identical in form to the chambered tombs of Portugal and Ireland. These are not vague similarities, but specific architectural solutions that appear again and again. How is it that cultures separated by oceans and continents all arrived at the idea of raising and stacking stones of such immense scale? The first clue lies in the sky above these monuments. Many of these sites are not randomly placed. They are precisely oriented to celestial events. The famous Stonehenge in England is a complex astronomical calculator, marking the solstices with breathtaking accuracy. But this practice was not unique to Europe. In the ancient city of Nabta in Egypt, a stone circle older than Stonehenge aligns with the summer solstice and the bright stars of Orion's belt. Across the Atlantic, at a site like Cahokia in North America, wooden versions of these circles served a similar purpose, tracking the movement of the sun. This shared focus on astronomy suggests a universal human impulse to understand the cosmos, to mark time, and to anchor their sacred spaces to the rhythms of the heavens. The timeline of this global phenomenon is perhaps the most baffling aspect. These structures were not built over a span of 10,000 years. Radiocarbon dating reveals a startling convergence. In Europe, the great megalithic tombs were constructed between 5,000 and 6,000 years ago. At roughly the same time, thousands of miles away, the first dolmens were being raised in the Korean peninsula. In Ethiopia, the magnificent carved stelae of Tia are younger, but still part of this wider tradition of monumental stonework. This rough synchronicity across the world defies easy explanation. Were human societies, once they reached a certain level of social organization, simply destined to express their power and beliefs through giant stones? The engineering itself presents another layer of mystery. The methods for moving and erecting these megaliths demonstrate a sophisticated knowledge of physics and logistics that seems to have emerged independently. From the use of log rollers and rope to the ingenious technique of levering stones into prepared pits, the practical solutions are remarkably consistent. The massive moai statues of Easter Island were transported miles from the quarry using a rocking motion, a technique that would not look out of place at a European Neolithic site. This points to a shared human ingenuity when faced with a common problem: how to manipulate a world of stone with nothing but human muscle, wood, and intellect. So we are left with a profound puzzle. Does this global pattern reveal a deep psychic unity of humankind, a collective unconscious that drove different cultures to build in the same way at the same time? Or does it hint at the faint traces of an incredibly ancient cultural diffusion, a slow-moving wave of ideas that traveled across the world, influencing builders from the Atlantic to the Pacific? The stones themselves offer no easy answer, standing as silent, monumental questions carved from the very bones of the earth. A great flood rises in every corner of the ancient world, swallowing the land in a story told from the banks of the Euphrates to the highlands of Peru. In the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, the god E warns the hero Utnapishtim to build a boat and save the seeds of life. Half a world away, the Aztecs spoke of a deluge that destroyed the fourth sun, leaving only a single man and woman to repopulate the earth. In India, the Puranas tell of Manu, who is warned by a fish to build a massive ark. The structure is hauntingly familiar: a divine warning, a chosen survivor, a vessel of salvation, and a world reborn from the waters. How do we explain such specific parallels appearing across oceans? One school of thought points inward to the shared architecture of the human mind. The psychologist Carl Jung proposed the idea of archetypes, universal symbols and story patterns buried deep in our collective unconscious. From this perspective, the dragon is not a creature that was physically seen and described, but a primal embodiment of chaos and the untamed forces of nature. The hero's journey, a narrative of leaving home, facing trials, and returning transformed, is a metaphor for every individual's path to maturity. These stories well up from a common psychic source, a natural human way of making sense of life's great challenges and transitions. Yet another interpretation hears in these echoes not a shared psychology, but the faint whispers of actual journeys. The diffusionist theory suggests these myths were carried, like precious cargo, by ancient travelers along those forgotten trade routes and sea lanes. A story told by a Mesopotamian merchant could have been passed along, adapted and reshaped, until it found a home in the oral traditions of a distant culture. The serpent motif presents a particularly powerful case. In Mesopotamia, the dragon Tiamat represents primordial chaos. In China, the dragon is a benevolent symbol of power and rain. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl is a creator god who brings knowledge and civilization. The core symbol is a serpent, but its meaning is fluid, shaped by the culture that adopted it. This fluidity could support either theory, a universal human fascination with the snake, or the travels of a core idea that was locally reinvented. Perhaps the most profound insight lies not in choosing one explanation over the other, but in recognizing what this global tapestry of myth reveals about our ancestors. Isolated by continents, they were united by the same fundamental questions. Where did we come from? Why is there suffering? What happens when we are gone? Their stories were their first attempts at science, philosophy, and theology, woven into narratives of gods and heroes. These myths were the ancient internet, a network of meaning that connected humanity not through cables, but through shared wonder and a common need to explain the terrifying and beautiful world around them. The silence of the Sahara is not an empty one, but filled with the whispers of ancient caravans. For centuries, we were told the Great Desert was an impenetrable barrier, but new discoveries are revealing it as a highway, active millennia before the famous Arab trade networks were ever recorded. Deep in the West African savanna, far from the Mediterranean coast, archaeologists have unearthed Roman glassware and coins in contexts that date back to the early centuries of the Common Era. At the same time, in North African ports, artifacts made from gold and ivory that could only have originated south of the desert appear in layers from the same period. These objects are not where the textbook timeline says they should be, scattered like breadcrumbs along a forgotten path. The key that unlocked this desert highway was not a map, but a creature, the camel. While widespread use is often attributed to later periods, evidence points to a gradual process of domestication and adaptation that made sustained crossings possible much earlier than we once thought. The development of the camel saddle itself was a technological revolution, allowing for the transport of significant cargo across vast, waterless stretches. This was not a single moment of discovery, but a slow mastery of one of the most extreme environments on Earth, turning a wasteland into a conduit. What traveled along these routes was far more than luxury goods. The movement of technologies tells a deeper story of shared knowledge. In West Africa, sophisticated ironworking traditions emerged at sites like the Nok culture. The techniques used there show a distinctiveness that suggests local innovation, yet the very idea of smelting ore may have traveled north to south across the desert, passed from one community to another. This exchange of practical knowledge, the movement of an idea as transformative as any material good, reveals a connection that was cultural and intellectual, not merely commercial. These early Trans-Saharan interactions challenge the persistent myth of an isolated Africa. They paint a picture of a continent already dynamically engaged with the wider world, its southern kingdoms connected to the Roman Mediterranean through a complex web of indirect trade. Gold from the forests of West Africa may have found its way to Roman mints, while glass beads and textiles moved in the other direction, weaving together economies and cultures. This was not the formalized system of later centuries, but an organic, resilient network that pulsed with life long before history officially took note. It suggests our maps of the ancient world are still missing critical lines, lines drawn not in ink, but in the shifting sands of the greatest desert on Earth. Deep beneath the forests of the Great Lakes, ancient miners quarried a treasure from the earth, pure copper in staggering quantities. For over 3,000 years, from around 4,000 to 1,000 years before the present, people worked the veins along Lake Superior, extracting an estimated 1.5 billion pounds of raw metal. They did not smelt the ore, but instead pounded it free from the rock with heavy stone hammers, a laborious process that left behind vast mining pits and countless tons of discarded rubble. The scale of this enterprise is almost incomprehensible, a North American industry operating on an industrial level millennia before European contact. This was not a small-scale local craft. The sheer volume of copper removed suggests it was feeding a continent-wide demand. Archaeologists have uncovered artifacts made from this distinctive Lake Superior copper across the United States, from elaborate ceremonial objects in the great mound cities of the Ohio River Valley to practical tools and ornaments found as far south as the Gulf of Mexico and as far west as the Rocky Mountains. The presence of this material tells a clear story of intricate trade routes, with the raw copper or finished goods moving through a vast exchange network that connected diverse cultures. Yet, this continental distribution may only be part of the story. A more tantalizing mystery involves the copper's potential journey across the Atlantic. Some researchers have pointed to a curious gap in the European Bronze Age record. Around the same time as the peak of the Great Lakes mining, there is evidence of a sudden, massive infusion of new copper into European metallurgy. The question arose, could some of this metal have its origins in the New World? The science of archaeometallurgy offers a potential key. Copper, like a geological fingerprint, contains trace elements that are unique to its source. By analyzing the chemical signature of an ancient artifact, scientists can often match it to the specific mine from which the metal was extracted. When this technique has been applied to European Bronze Age artifacts, the results have largely pointed to known Old World sources in places like Cyprus and the Alps. However, the analysis is not yet exhaustive, and the possibility remains that some small fraction of European bronze could contain an American component, a secret ingredient from a world they were not supposed to know. The technological sophistication of the Great Lakes miners is undeniable. They developed specialized tools and techniques for working the native copper, cold hammering it into shape and using careful heating to anneal it, making it less brittle and easier to work. This was advanced indigenous metallurgy, perfectly adapted to the material they had. The enduring enigma is one of volume. Where did all that copper truly go? The artifacts found across North America, while numerous, do not account for the billions of pounds that were removed from the ground. Was it stockpiled in forms that have since corroded away? Was it traded in such vast quantities that it simply dispersed into 1,000 different communities, lost to time? Or does its trail lead farther than we have ever dared to look, hinting at a transoceanic network that carried this precious American metal into the foundries of the ancient Old World? The silent, empty mines of Lake Superior hold their secret close, a testament to a trade network whose true scale we are only beginning to fathom. The grand networks of the Bronze Age did not end with a whisper but with a shattering collapse. Around 1200 BCE, a wave of fire and destruction swept across the eastern Mediterranean, toppling mighty empires from the Hittites in Anatolia to the Mycenaeans in Greece. In the midst of this chaos, a new and terrifying force appears in the historical record, known to us only by the name given to them by their victims, the Sea Peoples. Carved into the temple walls at Medinet Habu in Egypt, the pharaoh Ramses III left a vivid account of their assault. He describes a confederation of warriors from the sea, moving with their families in ox-drawn carts, a whole people on the march. The inscriptions list their mysterious names: the Peliset, the Shekelesh, the Denyon. Who were these enigmatic mariners, and where did they come from? Their sudden, coordinated attacks on Egypt and other powers suggest they were not mere pirates, but a symptom of a much larger, interconnected crisis. The archaeological record reveals a stark pattern. Across the region, great cities like Ugarit and Hattusa were violently destroyed and abandoned, their palaces burned and their trade routes severed. This was not an isolated event in one kingdom, but a simultaneous failure of multiple, interconnected civilizations. The scale of the collapse points to a perfect storm of pressures. Climate data from tree rings and sediment cores indicates a period of severe drought and food shortages would have placed immense strain on these complex societies. This environmental stress likely triggered mass migrations as desperate populations sought new lands, clashing with established kingdoms in a fierce competition for dwindling resources. The Sea Peoples may not have been a single ethnic group, but a collection of different displaced populations, perhaps from the Aegean, Anatolia, and beyond, united by their desperation and their mastery of the sea. Their success was built on a crucial technological shift. They seem to have mastered new forms of maritime warfare and perhaps employed superior metal weapons, giving them an edge against the Bronze Age armies of the great empires. This maritime dimension is key to understanding the global nature of the collapse. The very sea lanes that had once carried luxury goods and ideas now became highways for conflict and chaos, transmitting instability from one fragile state to the next. The fall of the Hittite Empire disrupted the tin trade, a vital component for making bronze, which in turn crippled the military capabilities of Egypt and others. The phenomenon of the Sea Peoples demonstrates the dark side of ancient globalization. The same networks that fostered prosperity and cultural exchange could, when pushed to the brink, become a conduit for cascading failure, linking the fates of distant civilizations in a shared vulnerability. Their mysterious invasion forces us to see the Bronze Age world not as a collection of isolated kingdoms, but as a single, integrated system, one that proved tragically fragile when its foundations were shaken. While the Sea Peoples represented a collapse of Mediterranean networks, other maritime traditions were flourishing along the African coastline. The walls of an Egyptian temple tell a vivid story of a royal expedition to a land of wonders. The famed reliefs at Deir el-Bahri, commissioned by the female pharaoh Hatshepsut, depict a fleet of sleek Egyptian ships returning from the mysterious land of Punt. Their cargo holds are overflowing with treasures, sacks of fragrant myrrh resin, live myrrh trees with their roots carefully packed in baskets, ebony wood, ivory tusks, and even exotic animals. This was not a raid, but a sophisticated trade mission to a land the Egyptians considered a divine and wealthy partner. The precise location of Punt is still debated, with theories placing it along the Red Sea coast in modern-day Somalia or Eritrea, or perhaps farther south. What these records confirm is the existence of a thriving, long-distance maritime network in the Indian Ocean, one that connected ancient Egypt to the riches of the African interior and possibly beyond, centuries before Common Era. This was not an isolated event, but part of a sustained and sophisticated exchange. The Egyptians were not the only masters of these waters. The Carthaginians, a civilization born in North Africa, pushed maritime exploration in the opposite direction. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, a Carthaginian expedition led by a navigator named Hanno sailed south through the Strait of Gibraltar and down the Atlantic coast of Africa. Their mission was to establish colonies and explore the unknown. The account describes passing active volcanoes and encountering what they called gorillas, likely a reference to large apes. While the exact extent of their journey is uncertain, the story demonstrates a clear Carthaginian capability and ambition for Atlantic exploration. Their ships were sturdy, their navigational skills honed by centuries of Mediterranean trade. This was not a timid coastal crawl, but a deliberate venture into the open Atlantic. The legacy of these seafaring traditions did not vanish. Centuries later, the West African empires of Ghana and Mali, renowned for their vast wealth in gold, were also connected to this maritime world. While their overland Saharan trade is well known, their access to the Atlantic and riverine networks suggests a parallel naval culture. The historical account of Mansa Abubakari II's ambitious Atlantic voyage fits into this broader context of African maritime engagement. It was not an anomaly, but a potential expression of a long-standing tradition of ocean-going exploration. These stories, from the incense-laden ships returning from Punt to the Carthaginian vessels braving the Atlantic swell, fundamentally reshape our map of the ancient world. They reveal that sophisticated seafaring was not the exclusive domain of Europeans or Polynesians. Africa had its own proud and capable naval histories, its own explorers who looked out across the endless blue horizon and wondered what lay beyond. This evidence of transoceanic potential, woven from temple reliefs and classical histories, challenges us to see the currents of the Indian and Atlantic Oceans not as barriers, but as ancient highways for cultural and economic exchange, connecting Africa to a world far wider than we have often been taught. A coconut bobbing on an ocean current carries within its shell a map of human history. The journey of domesticated plants across the Pacific forms one of the most compelling archives of ancient connection, a living record written in leaves and seeds. Take the humble bottle gourd, a plant whose hard shell was used for centuries as a container and musical instrument. Its wild ancestors are native to Africa, yet it appears in the Americas at a remarkably early date. The question of how it crossed the Atlantic has long puzzled researchers, but its presence on both sides of the Pacific adds another layer to the mystery. Genetic studies reveal that the bottle gourds found in ancient American contexts are not closely related to African varieties, but to Asian ones. This suggests a separate, prehistoric introduction, likely carried across the Pacific by human hands as a useful, buoyant vessel long before it was ever planted in new soil. The coconut palm presents an even more intricate puzzle. For a long time, its wide distribution was simply attributed to the nuts floating across the seas. Yet, the ecological reality is more complex. While the coconut can indeed survive a long journey at sea, its successful establishment on a new shoreline is far from guaranteed. It requires specific conditions and often human assistance to thrive and spread inland. Genetic analysis has uncovered a deep split between the coconuts of the Pacific Basin and those of the Indian Ocean, pointing to two separate domestications. More astonishingly, a distinct genetic lineage found in the coconuts of coastal Panama shows clear links to the Philippines. This is not the result of a wayward nut drifting on a current. It is the signature of a direct, human-mediated transfer across the entire breadth of the Pacific, a transplant that could only have happened through intentional voyage. Then there is the story of cotton, a plant that weaves together the hemispheres in its very DNA. Scientists studying the genetics of domesticated cotton made a stunning discovery. The cotton species that was widely cultivated in the Americas, Gossypium hirsutum, is actually a natural hybrid. It carries the complete set of chromosomes from an American wild cotton, but also the complete set from a species native to Africa or Asia. This hybridization event, which geneticists estimate occurred over 1 million years ago, is a botanical marvel. It suggests that at some point in the deep past, a cotton seed from the Old World somehow crossed the ocean and, against all odds, hybridized with a New World plant. This created a new species that was then independently discovered and domesticated by ancient Americans. The plant itself is a living fossil of a transoceanic voyage that occurred in the natural world, setting the stage for later human cultivators. The most powerful evidence, however, comes from the deliberate movement of staple crops. We have already seen the sweet potato's journey from South America to Polynesia. But consider the banana, a plant whose origins lie in Southeast Asia. Traces of banana phytoliths, microscopic silica structures from plant cells, have been identified in ancient soil samples from South America dating to well before Columbus. How does a plant from the jungles of Asia find its way to the Americas without human assistance? It does not. Its presence hints at a moment of contact, a sharing of horticultural wealth between cultures that history insists should never have met. These were not accidental transfers. A sweet potato cutting or a banana sucker requires careful handling to survive a long ocean voyage. They represent a conscious effort to transport and establish a valuable food source in a new land. Each of these plants tells a silent story of encounter. A Polynesian voyaging canoe, its hull laden with precious cuttings of taro and breadfruit, might have returned from an eastern voyage with a new, resilient tuber, the sweet potato. Alternatively, a South American seafarer navigating the same currents could have introduced a bundle of cotton seeds or a banana plant to their community. These botanical exchanges were not random acts of nature. They were the result of planning, of knowledge, and of the profound human understanding that a new plant could mean the difference between scarcity and abundance. The genetic patterns etched into these crops reveal a world where the vast Pacific was not an empty void, but a garden, its seeds patiently carried across the stars by the most daring of gardeners. A polished bronze disc etched with celestial patterns lies silent on the ocean floor for 2,000 years. The Antikythera Mechanism, recovered from a Roman shipwreck, is not a simple timepiece but a complex, gear-driven computer capable of predicting planetary movements and eclipses. This single artifact shatters our perception of ancient technological capability. If such a sophisticated device existed in the 1st century before the Common Era, what other advanced navigational tools might have been crafted and then lost to time? The gears of the mechanism model the irregular motions of the moon, a feat of engineering that would not be replicated for over a millennium. It proves that the conceptual leap from observing the stars to mechanically calculating their paths had already been taken. This was not just astronomy, it was applied science of the highest order, the kind of knowledge that could transform stargazing into precise, repeatable ocean navigation. How many other ships carried such devices, their secrets now dissolved by seawater? The most powerful tools were often the simplest. A straight stick called a gnomon could tell a sailor his latitude with remarkable accuracy. By measuring the length of the shadow it cast at local noon and comparing it to known values from their home port, a navigator could determine how far north or south they had traveled. This simple principle was within reach of countless ancient cultures. The Arab camel refined this idea, a small wooden rectangle on a knotted string. By holding the card at arm's length and aligning it with the North Star and the horizon, a sailor could read his latitude directly from the knot held between his teeth. These were not complex instruments requiring a royal workshop. They were elegant solutions born from generations of empirical observation. The real library of ancient navigation was not made of parchment but of memory. Polynesian wayfinders stored their star compasses and wave patterns in chants passed from master to apprentice. In Europe, the oral traditions of Viking Ladarsteiners, who could read the sunstones and wave patterns of the North Atlantic, were eventually written down in medieval texts like the Icelandic sagas. These writings often reference even older knowledge, hinting at a technical literature that has vanished. A medieval Portolan chart, with its stunningly accurate coastlines drawn from a web of compass bearings, feels like a copy of a copy, a faded echo of a much older cartographic tradition developed by sailors who understood the world as a sphere. This points to a cyclical pattern in human history where knowledge is gained, centralized, and then tragically lost in a societal collapse. The burning of the Library of Alexandria is the iconic example, but it is just one of many. The precise maritime charts that must have guided Zheng He's massive fleets were likely destroyed by a court that saw exploration as a threat. The engineering principles behind the Antikythera Mechanism disappeared for centuries. Each time this happens, humanity is forced to rediscover what it once knew. This cycle of discovery and oblivion could easily explain the tantalizing evidence of early global contact. A culture on the cusp of mastering the oceans, using tools and techniques we are only now beginning to reconstruct, might have forged a connection that lasted for a generation before fading away. Their legacy is not in a continuous historical record, but in the sweet potato that took root on a distant island, the chicken bones in a pre-Columbian midden, and the silent, enigmatic gears of a machine found at the bottom of the sea. Our own blood carries a map of journeys we never knew we took. Deep within the genetic code of indigenous populations in South America, scientists have found a whisper from across the widest ocean. Specific markers, lineages that trace back to ancient Australasian populations, are present in groups living deep in the Amazon basin. This is not a faint signal, but a clear genetic signature that should not exist if the Americas were populated solely by migrations across the Bering Land Bridge. It suggests that at some point in the deep past, a group of people from the distant islands of Southeast Asia or Melanesia made an incredible voyage across the Pacific, reaching the shores of South America and leaving a permanent biological trace in the ancestry of the people they encountered. This discovery forces a profound question. How did this genetic thread weave itself into the fabric of a continent an entire world away? The answer lies in the distribution of haplogroups, which are large sets of genetic variants passed down through millennia. These haplogroups act like family names written in DNA, allowing researchers to trace ancient lineages. The patterns they reveal are often startling. A haplogroup common in one part of the world might appear as a rare but distinct branch in a population on another continent, creating a bridge across geographical barriers that we once thought were impenetrable. These patterns do not always align with the clean, simple maps of human migration we have long been taught. They reveal a messier, more adventurous story of multiple routes, failed settlements, and unexpected encounters that have shaped the human family in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. The most crucial clues come from timing. By calculating the rate at which genetic mutations naturally accumulate, scientists can estimate when two populations last shared a common ancestor. This provides a chronological anchor for when these incredible contacts might have occurred. The genetic mixing event that introduced Australasian ancestry into South America, for instance, appears to have happened at least 15,000 years ago, a timeline that suggests these were some of the very earliest voyages across open ocean. This genetic evidence does not stand alone. It weaves together with the archaeological finds, the chicken bones in Chile and the sweet potato in Polynesia, to create a richer, more complex tapestry. It tells us that our ancestors were not just wandering blindly into new lands. They were navigating, exploring, and making contact across staggering distances, their successful journeys recorded not in history books, but in the very cells of their descendants. This is a story written in our genes, a silent narrative of connection that challenges the idea of a world ever being truly separate. The silent ruins of past civilizations are not all found on dry land. Beneath the waves, an entire lost world awaits discovery, a world that holds the missing pieces to our ancient puzzle. For thousands of years, as the great ice sheets melted at the end of the last ice age, global sea levels rose by over 400 feet, swallowing vast stretches of coastal territory that were once home to our ancestors. This slow flooding did not just change the map, it erased it, submerging the very landscapes where early seafaring cultures likely built their villages and launched their first voyages. The field of underwater archaeology is now diving into these depths to find what was lost. Imagine a vast, low-lying plain that once connected Great Britain to mainland Europe, a place known to scientists as Doggerland. This was not a narrow land bridge, but a rich, habitable territory the size of a modern country, with rolling hills, rivers, and forests. For millennia, it was home to Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. Then, as the climate warmed, the seas gradually encroached until around 6,200 years ago. A final catastrophic tsunami likely finished the process, drowning this entire world beneath the North Sea. Today, fishermen in the area sometimes haul up not just fish, but ancient mammoth bones and stone tools in their nets, eerie reminders of the sunken landscape below. This story of submerged pathways is echoed on the other side of the world. The Bering Land Bridge, or Beringia, was another vast, now drowned continent that connected Asia to North America. It served as a corridor for plants, animals, and the first human populations to enter a new world. Its submergence did not just cut off two continents, it hid the primary route of human migration under the cold waters of the Bering Strait. These sunken lands force a fundamental shift in our perspective. The coastlines our ancient ancestors knew are not our coastlines. Their ports, their settlements, and the evidence of their earliest maritime experiments now lie miles out to sea on what was once dry land. Finding this evidence requires technology as advanced as the seafaring it seeks to prove. Modern marine archaeology uses side-scan sonar to create detailed, photographic-like images of the seafloor, revealing unnatural shapes and patterns that hint at human activity. Submersible robots can then be sent thousands of feet down to investigate these anomalies, their robotic arms carefully retrieving artifacts from the sediment without disturbing their context. This technology has already led to stunning discoveries, like ancient shipwrecks found in deep water far from any expected trade route, their preserved cargoes silently testifying to journeys we never knew were taken. Every submerged settlement discovered, every ancient wreck mapped in an unexpected location, is a potential key. These underwater sites, preserved in the cold, dark, oxygen-poor environment of the deep sea, are often in a far better state than their counterparts on land. They are time capsules holding the tools, the seeds, and the very boats that could finally confirm the daring voyages we have only been able to speculate about. The true map of ancient human connectivity is not in our history books, but lying on the continental shelves, waiting for us to read its sunken script. That single polished stone tool found in two distant continents presents a fundamental riddle. Did two different minds, separated by an ocean, arrive at the same brilliant solution by chance, or was the idea passed from one hand to another across a forgotten bridge? This question lies at the heart of a great debate that has shaped our understanding of human history, the tension between independent invention and cultural diffusion. On one side of this divide are the compelling cases for parallel development. The invention of agriculture is a powerful example. Why did societies in the Middle East, China, and Mesoamerica all begin domesticating plants and animals within a few thousand years of each other, despite no evidence of contact? The answer may lie in a shared environmental trigger. As the last ice age ended, global climate stabilized, creating conditions ripe for experimentation with wild grasses and animals. Faced with similar opportunities, human ingenuity in these separate cradles of civilization converged independently on the same revolutionary idea, a shift from hunting and gathering to farming. The pyramid form offers another fascinating case. From Egypt to Cambodia to Mexico, we see these monumental structures rising towards the heavens. While their exact purposes varied, the pyramid is fundamentally the most stable way to build something very tall with stone. It is a logical architectural solution that multiple cultures could have discovered on their own, a testament to a universal human drive to reach for the sky and to create lasting monuments to power and belief. Our very minds may be wired for such convergence. Cognitive scientists suggest that all humans share similar problem-solving hardware. Presented with a common challenge, like storing food or creating a cutting tool, different cultures often arrive at remarkably similar answers, not because of contact, but because certain solutions are simply more obvious, more efficient, or more in tune with our shared cognitive biases. This is the argument for psychic unity, the idea that humanity's shared mental framework naturally leads to parallel cultural expressions. Yet, for every case of apparent independent genius, there is a counter-example that screams of contact. The sweet potato's genetic and linguistic trail across the Pacific is difficult to explain through anything other than human transfer. The specific, complex technique of lost wax bronze casting, which involves creating a wax model, encasing it in clay, and then melting the wax to pour in molten metal, appears in both West Africa and Southeast Asia at strikingly similar times. This is not a simple, intuitive process like piling stones. It is a sophisticated, multi-step recipe that seems less likely to have been spontaneously invented twice. This is where the evidence becomes a detective's puzzle, and our tools are often insufficient. An archaeologist might find a similar pottery style in two regions, but without a datable trade item, like a coin or a distinct imported object found in the same layer, it is nearly impossible to prove contact over independent artistic evolution. A shared myth could be a remnant of a deep prehistoric connection, or it could be a story that emerged separately to explain a universal human experience, like a great flood. How do we tell the difference? The most honest answer is that we frequently cannot, at least not with absolute certainty. Our view of the past is like looking at a shattered mosaic through a dense fog. We have many pieces, but their original arrangement remains open to interpretation. Perhaps the most profound insight from this entire debate is that the question itself might be flawed. The history of humanity is not a binary choice between complete isolation and constant connection. It is a dynamic rhythm of both. For long periods, a culture might develop in glorious isolation, its innovations perfectly tailored to its local environment. Then a single voyage, a chance encounter, or a slow trickle of trade along a chain of islands could introduce a transformative new idea, a crop, or a technology that then sparks a new phase of local innovation. The real story is not one of either or, but of both and. Our ancestors were brilliant independent inventors and daring long-distance connectors, and their legacy is a world whose deep history is far more intertwined and far more mysterious than we ever supposed. This emerging picture leaves us with a world reborn in our understanding. We no longer see isolated civilizations developing in a vacuum, but a tapestry of cultures potentially exchanging ideas, goods, and even genes across distances we once thought impossible. The cumulative weight of the evidence is simply too great to ignore. A sweet potato in Polynesia, chicken bones in Chile, the silent question of the Olmec heads, and the shared celestial mathematics etched into stone across the globe. These are not random anomalies. They are individual threads in a vast, ancient web, hinting at a human story far more interconnected than our textbooks have long suggested. This pattern challenges the clean, linear narratives we have clung to for centuries. It reveals a deep, abiding human drive to explore, to trade, and to connect that predates our written records by millennia. While countless questions remain unanswered and many mysteries may never be fully solved, their very possibility invites a new approach to history itself. It calls for a greater humility, an acknowledgement that the past holds secrets we are only beginning to perceive, and a sense of wonder at the incredible capabilities of our ancestors. We would love to hear which of these ancient mysteries resonates most deeply with you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you are ready for more journeys into history's greatest enigmas, be sure to subscribe. This investigation into our shared past is far from over. It is an open invitation to see history with new eyes. The conversation about these ancient connections continues to evolve, fueled by the work of researchers who dare to question established timelines. The writings of Gavin Menzies on maritime exploration or Stephen Oppenheimer's genetic studies offer fascinating entry points for your own journey into these mysteries. The next time you walk through a museum, pause before a display of ancient pottery or tools. Look past the standard description and ask a different set of questions. Where did the materials for this object truly originate? Could its design hint at an influence from a continent away? These small shifts in perspective can transform a quiet gallery into a landscape of thrilling possibilities. This rethinking of the past inevitably shapes how we see ourselves in the present. It challenges rigid ideas of cultural purity, suggesting instead that our identities have always been woven from threads of global exchange. Our shared human story is one of constant movement, encounter, and adaptation. If this journey through forgotten connections has sparked your curiosity, your engagement can help this vital conversation grow. Liking this video and subscribing to the channel supports our mission to explore history's greatest enigmas. Most importantly, share your own reflections and questions in the comments below. Which of these mysteries resonates most with you? Your voice adds another essential piece to the ever-unfolding puzzle of our collection.